Nice to be here again. I first had to move the microphone up because Filipino size and this European size. But that's how it is, we are all diverse. Yes, as said before, I will try to give a short overview, some impressions of the work in the recent 4 or 5 years. And maybe I can try to use this microphone and walk around it. Let's see that it works. You can hear me? Yeah, okay. So I'll move this one in a different direction. So, as said before, IPBES, the Intergovernmental Science and Knowledge Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, is a process which started in 2012, so actually it's 1 year. And the mission was to strengthen knowledge foundations for better policy through science, for conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, long-term human well-being, and sustainable development. This is an independent governmental body established in 2012 by governments across the globe. In the early time it was around 80, 90 governments starting this one. At the moment we have 132 member states in this IPBES process. The last one was Cook Islands, which was joined 2 months ago, something like this. It's currently implementing, IPBES is implementing its first work program, which ended last year, but it's still ongoing because we still have, let's say, activities which started in this first work program. And the second one will start sometime this year, 2019, beginning with the meeting in Paris. It's a collaborative partnership, an arrangement with UNEP, UNESCO, FAO, and UNDP. So it's a kind of really global undertaking where we try to integrate all these different kinds of activities and to make use of the knowledge created. The Secretariat is hosted in Germany in Bonn, where the Secretariat for IPBES is sitting in some TSU, so-called technical support units. Just briefly, the conceptual framework of IPBES, I don't go into details here, but just to show you the main components. So it's all about good quality of life, about human well-being, about living in harmony with nature. There are 3 different worldviews integrated here, and you can select the one you like most, like this. So for example, something we talk about well-being, others about quality of life. And then on this box you have nature, or biodiversity ecosystems, or Mother Earth, or systems of life. So trying to integrate these really different knowledge systems and different worldviews globally. So many of the Mother Earth things come from South America, for example, while biodiversity ecosystems are more natural science-oriented approach, but it's kind of trying to integrate all of them. When it comes to the nature's contribution to people, which is kind of heavily debated in the recent year, but also you can say ecosystems, goods and services, or nature's gifts. So it's kind of, to a certain extent, interchangeable. So different terminologies, trying to capture the same thing, trying to accommodate different worldviews we have around on the issue of biodiversity and services or nature in general. We look into the drivers, the natural ones and anthropogenic ones, and especially the indirect ones, which is institutional governance, which really frame most of the things we are doing. So decision making is based on indirect drivers, which affect the direct drivers. So we decide to burn lots of coal, which affects climate change as a direct driver, just one example. So separately also going into topics which relate to policies. Now the operating principles of IPBES, just some 6 boxes on this. But first we address terrestrial, marine and inland water biodiversity and services and their interactions. So it's covering more or less all living systems we have, except Antarctica, which is excluded due to political reasons. And we facilitate interdisciplinary and trans and multidisciplinary approaches. We ensure a full and effective participation of developing countries. It's kind of really a global undertaking. For example, in the global assessment, where I'm one of the co-chairs, we have 3 co-chairs, one from Brazil, one from Argentina, and me from Germany. Then we ensure the platform's credibility, relevance, and legitimacy, and promote its independence, which is not trivial, of course. We recognize the need for gender equity in its work. I will show you later, for example, in terms of participation. In our current assessment, we have around 50-50 male-female representation, which is not always easy to achieve, but we are getting always closer to this. This is a big effort, but it's possible. You have to know that all these approaches have very different dimensions. So gender equity is one of them, but also geographical balance and expertise. And combining all of it is sometimes really not really. Then we engage different knowledge systems, I mentioned it before, including indigenous and local knowledge as a source of information which so far was not so heavily used. For example, in the IPBES, where this was not really a relevant source of information. I think that all thing, yeah. So how is it structured? IPBES is first of all the plenary, which is the assembly of all the governments, 132 governments. It's the governing body of the entire process. As said before, we have 132 member states currently, and IPBES usually meets once per year. So the last meeting was last year in Bonn, the next one will be in Paris, the one before was in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Another one was in Panama, so it's all across the globe, different countries. And normally the meeting takes place where countries volunteer to organize the meeting, which is a kind of major effort. It's not so easy to find volunteering countries to have these plenary meetings. That's why oftentimes they are in Germany because the Secretariat is there and the infrastructure is there. Then we observe the plenary, for example, states which are not yet members. Then you have biodiversity-related conventions like the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity, is an important observer. Related UN bodies like UNFCCC, the Climate Change Convention, or other accredited organizations and agencies. There are many different agencies, also NGOs, accredited to the plenary. Then we have the Bureau as a kind of overseeing body for all administrative functions, and comprise the chair and 4 vice chairs and 5 additional officers. This is a kind of formal background. And we have the MAP, the so-called multidisciplinary expert panel, which oversees all scientific and technical functions. And this panel has 5 experts from each of the 5 UN regions. So from Western Europe and other countries, Western Europe, North America is one region, and Eastern Europe is one, then the Americas, Africa, and Asia Pacific. So Asia Pacific is by far the largest region, nearly covering half the globe. It's kind of a bit uneven distributed, this kind of regions. Then we have expert groups, and can we close the door? Or is it not possible? Noisy from the background. Chatting outside the problem. And having a mobile phone. Okay, expert groups and task forces we have that are selected scientists and knowledge holders. Those are the ones, let's say, assisting in certain contexts. And we have those carrying out the assessments and other deliverables which are done within this IPBES process. Secretariat, I mentioned before, including technical support unit, tries to implement the IPBES work in administration, supports it, supports plenary, bureau, and MAP, and is led by the executive secretary, which is Halle from France, who is now in Bonn and is in charge of the IPBES process as a secretary. So what does IPBES do? We have actually 4 complementary functions. And the first one is policy support. So that means identifying policy relevant and relevant tools and methodologies. It's all about policy relevance, by the way, contrary to policy prescription. So we try to be as neutral as possible, providing information is relevant, but the decision has to be made by decision makers or by the policy makers. So it's a very subtle kind of let's say balance you have to keep in order not to be prescriptive, just to be informative and to, let's say, provide something which might be good for decision making. It's also facilitating the use and catalyzing the future development, the policy support. Then it's building of capacity, identifying and meeting priority capacity needs of IPBES, members and experts and stakeholders. The third one is catalyzing the generation of new knowledge, identifying and indicating gaps in knowledge to be filled, to fill the gaps. But by far most of the activities so far have been in the field of assessments, so the 4th complementary function, assessing knowledge for synthesis and critical evaluation of available knowledge. This is the entire list of things which have been done or are ongoing right now. So first of all, we had assessments on specific themes. The first one was pollinators, pollination, and food production. I go into detail for this example, which was my talk's topic 2 years ago, August 2016. Then just finished the land degradation restoration of the global scale assessment. Then started now the sustainable use of wild species, and starting soon invasive alien species to finish 2022. So So these are some activities which are just going to get started. Then we have methodological ones, scenarios and models, was also finished in 2016 in parallel to the pollination one. And we have a values assessment which has started some months ago, and people start working now. This office has been selected, the co-chairs are there, so we get on moving. I'll tell you in a moment how this really works in the end to, let's say, select the authors and get the work done. And then at both regional and global scales, we had the regional assessment of biodiversity, 2018, which was one on Europe and Central Asia, one on Asia Pacific, one on Africa, and one on the Americas. So 4 so-called regional assessments. And I think in the end, I have this 5-minute film, I think I will show you this focus a bit on the Asia Pacific in the context of the entire assessments of IPBES. And we have the global one, on which I'm working with the colleagues as co-chair, and have 140 authors. And we finished the work more or less now. And this was some kind of recreation on 2 weeks in the Philippines after all this work, and then we go back home, and then we have to defend this at the end of April to plenary in Paris. Example, pollination. This is the front page of the summary of policymakers of this assessment. As I said, finished 2016. There we had 90 experts approximately across the globe, 2 co-chairs, 70 so-called coordinating lead authors, so those are the ones who are in charge of different chapters. We have 6 chapters in the assessment, and we have 2 to 3 CLAs per chapter organizing the whole thing. And then we have the lead authors who contribute also as chapter authors to these different chapters. We have review editors, those are the ones who watch the process and also try to keep you on track and also try to, let's say, make you behave in a nice way. Which means we receive thousands of comments. I'll come back to this later maybe as well. We have thousands of comments. For example, in pollination, we had a total of 20,000 comments across the globe in the whole assessment. And you have to reply to each single comment. What you did with the comment, did you, let's say, integrate in your assessment or you did not? And then you have to write why you did it or you did not. Which means you have to do it in a very polite way, which is not always easy because some comments might not be that helpful, put it like this. But then you have to really, let's say, be careful and maybe not answer more than 50 a day, because otherwise you run out of patience, this kind of things. Because all of these comments and all of the replies of the authors are public later. So whatever you say there will be available later and everybody can follow how your work was done. Before this is in public, review editors also check whether you did a job, which is a kind of, let's say, in a good way for the entire IPBES process. And we had 1 TSU coordinator in the United Nations involved. This whole team on pollination, which was kind of a very focused topic, of course, only pollination, but it was a good start because that's a topic which is a bit easy to tackle compared to many others. Has a positive reputation, so bees are always positive, more or less. And it's important for your food supply because many of the crops, especially fruits and also vegetables, depend to quite extent to pollination. That was the representation of the authors, so Philippines is not there, sorry for this, it's kind of a white spot here. But if you look across the globe, it's a quite nice spread across different countries. It also depends partly on the nomination process, so you can nominate your experts as a country to the UN body, and the nomination is a precondition, so your country nominates you, or kind of international organizations, precondition to be among those people who will be chosen in the process as experts. And I guess in the Philippines you would have good chances because we have a very, let's say, low representation of Asia in general in the whole nomination process. So it's dominated by VOC, that means Europeans, North Americans, white males like me. That's the dominant group. And all the rest is getting more complicated. South America is also nicely represented in the meantime, but still the translation from Europe and Africa is very difficult. There are not so many experts in Africa who can really choose there. But there are quite some now, and Southeast Asia, or Asia in general, which is a huge region, as I said before, has a variety of, large number of experts actually, but the nominations could be improved. So if there's some chance, we have no colleague who might be interested in invasive species, maybe it's the ongoing, or the values of nature, these kind of things, it might be worth considering. If you're interested in the process, you can easily approach me directly, or normally I have my email on the presentation, but this time I have not. You may ask your colleagues here. It's easy, Josef, Josef.Settele @ufset.de. So send an email and try to answer, normally try to answer in a reasonable time frame, let's say 2 weeks or something like this. So if you're interested, I can send you also material, for example, from this presentation. Okay, going back to the process, the example of pollination. So first we have this approved by governments document called scoping report. So in the scoping report, the governments put all the things in there which they expect the experts to work on and to provide advice. So the first document is a kind of a shopping list, more or less, of all the things governments would like to know. That's your baseline. So all the things which are there, you have to answer, you have to deal with. You can do more, of course, but you cannot do less. Which is not trivial again, because the topics are normally very broad, a lot of information. Only for pollination, in the last 15 years, there have been 260,000 ISI list publications on this topic only. It's of course impossible to cover all of it, so you have to find ways to systematically approach this huge amount of information to make it available for policymakers. So the scoping report starts, it was in January 2014, was accepted by IPBES 2. Then the call for experts was out in January 2014, and the map selects the experts, it was in March 2014. So all the nominations, they tried to select those people who, let's say, have this geographical balance, gender balance, and also scientific balance. All of these three have to match, which is always a huge challenge. So as soon as the authors are identified, they work on a so-called zero-order draft, which is a kind of internal review thing. So make the first draft of what you think should be in there, some bullet points, you give it to some of your colleagues for internal comments. And this one you use then later to develop a so-called first-order draft on different chapters, which was generally 2015. And this one then goes out for external review by experts. Experts is everybody who feels like an expert. So, but you have to register with your name. So you have to register online with your name, and you can make comments. But there are no anonymous comments. It's not like in the social media, where you just can put everything you like. You have to give your name, so you have to really stand to your point. That's quite important, also because you get comments in very different directions. For example, you have comments from NGOs or from the industry. And sometimes, of course, the comment reflects the background, which helps us also to, let's say, answer questions or comments which we receive. Okay, then we worked further on the second order draft, which was then only half a year, was very short actually. The second external review takes place, which is done by governments and by experts. So governments come in this round now, and experts once again. And then finally, a final government distribution, final assessment report, which is again reviewed by governments before the plenary in preparation, so they make comments, but I don't reply to these comments anymore, you just take them as an orientation for a plenary meeting. So in plenary, you have the summary for policymakers as an extraction of the entire work. And this is then agreed word by word in a consensus way. Which means if you have a long summary for policymakers, I think in pollination was 20 pages, something that sounds not much, but if you go word by word and have 120 delegations, it takes some time to agree on the comma. Or some kind of tiny phrase, because commas make a difference for lawyers. And many of the delegates come from a legal background. Someone has resigned. It's a mixture, but it's very heavily dominated by legal people because they have to see what are the things they can really follow and accept for their country in order to be implemented. So it's a long process. It's either for several days, sometimes nights, depends on how fast you are in agreeing. So far, all this processes have been successful in the end, because no country wants to be the reason for a failure of a global process. But it might take sometimes nights to work through, to discuss through, to come to this final consensus document. I've given a talk some years ago in another building here on IPCC, where I have shown some of the pictures of colleagues saying in the morning at 3 o'clock and falling asleep, this kind of things. I don't show them now because it's not on Facebook. I wouldn't really show the colleagues who have been kind of had reached their physical limits. Okay, so that's the final thing, the assessment report, and if you're lucky, and always the case, it's accepted, then you're through. And you have these authors meetings here, for the first one in Germany, second one in Brazil, and the third one in FAO in Italy. Just it was only 2.5 years in total, it was only 1.5 years, but 2.5 years in total to work on this assessment. And this in the plenary, that's on picture now from the Bonn plenary. Normally you see there's somebody in front, somebody's chairing it, that's Bob Hudson here, for example, sharing it, and then you do discussion. And then on the screen is the text in the Word document, you go on track changes, and then you go track changes back and forth until every country makes comments on the sentence. The final sentence is is approved, the hammer is falling, next sentence. So you can imagine it takes a bit of time to go through a 20-page document. So it's all about patience. Patience, politeness, diplomacy. You never should be angry at something. Be patient. Just repeat your arguments, convince people, use the breaks in between to make some background work to convince people, and this kind of things. So this, for example, there was a plenary in Columbus, so I'm sitting here. It's the same jacket, but I have changed my shirt in the meantime. So that's the team there. This was the discussion on pesticides and pollination. It took us maybe 2 hours, something like this, to agree on a disagreement first. So the most extreme countries like USA, France, Germany, very different attitudes was the topic. 10 countries then formed a kind of friends of the table. Together with some of the authors, you go out in a separate meeting and develop a new text proposal and bring it back to plenary. So we did this, it took us 2 hours. So when you had a break, we had to work. So in the breaks you have this, let's say, friends of tables. You come back and you make a proposal to the plenary, and then hopefully you accept it, which was the case. In this case, it was interesting to see that the original text we had in the chapter on pesticides was 95% and used for some policymakers. So we invested a lot of time where we thought, make it more simple, the authors before the meeting, and then we noticed, well, it's not more simple, we understand it. So they went back to the original text, we adopted this one, then it was accepted. So it was took only 3 to 4 hours for 14 lines, or 20 lines, something like this. Just give you a dimension of time you need for this. But it was quite nice to be successful. In the end, it was 11 p.m., so okay, good night, it was pesticides done. And there's all these different aspects there. Some are unexpected. We had a lot of discussion on biocultural diversity, which for us was a term we often used, but suddenly there was a comment from one major Western country, said, okay, we can't accept the term. Oh gosh, what's happening now? And they can't agree, so they had to phone back home with the capital to find a solution, which was overnight. We continued next morning. The solution was to put a footnote there, the definition of the term only for the context of this assessment. But it took us hours to come to this one footnote. So some things look easy, but are very complicated. Others, you think it's complicated, but they're very easy. It's very hard to predict. Okay, so this was the summary of policymakers pollination food production. I picked some slides which I've shown you 2.5 years ago already, just to give you some examples what we used for the delegates to, let's say, summarize the findings in some kind of simple format. So first we try to show that pollinators are diverse. So these are the ones which are known as wild pollinators, those which are not managed by mankind. And you see many different groups. Of course, you have bees as the most important group, but many others as well, like here in Africa, some birds, or South America here, or you have some vertebrates in Australia. So it goes across many different taxa or beds up here. It's dominated by bees and wild bees, 20,000 species of wild bees cross-invented globally, but also many other groups are in there. It was just to show the delegates there's huge diversity. It's not only honeybee. Honeybee is just one aspect of the entire industry. Then the managed ones, which includes the honeybee or honeybees, like the Apis cerana here in Asia, but also Apis mellifera and others, and also those which are kept in greenhouses. So the bumblebees are used for pollinating of tomatoes, for example, in greenhouses in Europe. So these are all the ones managed. This is the entire diversity, just showing it kind of optically. It's much easier to present this in an optical way rather than having statistics of number of species. That's too abstract. Look at the range of benefits. So 90% of the world's flowering plants are animal pollinated. That's often why they're flowering, of course, but also weed pollinated plants are flowering, like rice and wheat. And more than 75% of leading food crops at least depend on part of animal pollination. You can express this in this way. This dependency will rise quite a bit, so wheat, rice, and cassava, they are wind pollinated and hardly need any other pollination. But for example, crops like coca is, you lose more than 90%, is what it's shown here, 90% of the yield if there is no pollination taking place. So that's true for 12% of the leading crops. Here you lose 40 to 90% mainly for fruits, apples, mangoes, etc. Many other crops that's quite varied in the dependency. Some are very low, some are high, depending on the variety, for example. So coffee is there, oilseed rape, or also soybean, just some examples. But the vast majority of crops benefits from pollination. Some are really dependent on pollination. That was the other message here. It's also interesting to know that global agriculture increasingly depends on pollination. So the darker the fields here are, the more is the percentage of expected agricultural loss in the absence of animal pollination. So by this one up to, let's say, 1/4 of the production in the absence of pollination in some countries like here in Central Asia or in East Asia. We can also look at differently, for example, the monetary value pollination is providing. We take the market value of the products which depend on pollination, correct them for the dependency on pollination. So let's say 100% dependent crop comes in at 100%, like almonds, for example. Or if it's only 50%, only 50% of the market value is kind of counted here. If you do this exercise, you reach something like $230 to $570 billion of value per year on market prices, which is just depending on pollination. But of course, also depending on other services like nutrients. Without nutrients, you can pollinate as much as you like, but the plant doesn't grow, of course, you need both. But without pollination, it also doesn't work. We see the global spread, for example, Southeast Asia and also East Asia is heavily dependent on pollination. Also parts of Europe, especially Mediterranean areas. Others are less, so like South America, some many parts, or in Africa. So it depends very much on the crop which is used and on its dependency on pollination. And of course, there are many vendors beyond food. So medicines, biofuels, fibers, construction materials, are examples here. And also source of inspiration for art, music, literature, religion, technology. We went into this quite a bit, and they have shown some examples, but I don't have them here now. For example, all world religions like the Islamic religion, Christianity, Maya culture, many different ones. All of them have pollination or bees in their texts, in their songs, or in their traditions. So it's kind of interesting that everywhere pollination, especially bees, play a role in our cultural heritage. Looking at status of managed honeybees, for example here. So what many people don't know on a global scale, ever since the 1960s, we had an increase, in this case, the number of hives, millions of honeybees across the globe. So the bee decline is not a global phenomenon. It's mainly an increase, but in some areas it was declining. You see here some examples, like Germany was one of them. But it only goes up to 2010 or something, because the data have not been updated for this assessment. Now there are newer data. For example, in Germany, that's where I come from, we have now an increase again. And the whole thing is mainly dependent on beekeepers. The beekeeper is the main driver of honeybee abundance. It's not surprising, but sometimes you have to mention this, because people think we have these bee diseases, this disease collapse is all the thing. But it's mainly about beekeeping and doing it the right way. It's becoming fashionable in our country, which contributes to the increase again. So this is an issue which is mainly about social factors, beekeeping. So you have the hives, the daytime, and the loss in North America and many European countries. Other countries cause an increase in many cases. But wild insects is quite different. So many of the wild bees are affected by declines. We have other studies, so there are different studies which really show all in the same direction, and most of them the widespread decline of North American bumblebees, for example. So many different studies which just show you there is a problem there. So declines in diversity occurs of some bees. We have butterflies in Europe and North America. These are the only continents where you have continental data. Normally you have maybe local or national data if you're very lucky, but not the rest. And 9%, for example, of European bees and butterflies are threatened, which doesn't sound much, but it's on a continental scale, and they are threatened all over the whole continents. On national lists, normally you have 40% or more which are on red lists, which also shows part of the problem. This is about species diversity, not about the abundance of all pollinating creatures out there. And we have lack of data from many other regions, which precludes assessments of status, but some local reports of declines are available across the globe. The causes of declines, this is kind of the shopping list we got from the governments in this public document. So we get all of these aspects: land use change, intensive agriculture, pesticides, GMOs, pathogens, climate change, invasive species, and the interactions, which is a very tricky thing, but the most important one at the end. And as you know from other scientific undertakings, it's difficult to link specific drivers to observe declines. You can observe two things and you can correlate them, but it's very hard to find causalities. So from these ones, I just picked out two examples. The land use change, we put them into risks and opportunities. Production in food, nesting, and other resources is one effect of the land use change. You have the loss of habitat, fragmentation, degradation. which applies to agricultural, natural, urban areas. Because often we think about, let's say, agricultural land or natural lands, but not about urban lands. And in many settings, also urban settings have quite important functions for the diversity of species, in this case for pollinators. So the loss of habitat is sure an important element which relates to the loss of many of the species, because simply lost the primary habitats, primary forests, or in our case in Europe we have all the secondary habitats, which are the old land use systems, cultural landscapes, which have many species adapted to this kind of land use, but the land use changes more rapidly than they can adapt, so you lose them as well. Responses provide food and nesting resources, in this case, restore native habitat patches if possible, establish protected areas, is one of the approaches, and increase habitat heterogeneity, which again applies to any kind of setting. And the pesticide part is about the risks here. There's a broad range of lethal and sublethal effects. The sublethal ones became let's say, famous in the last 3, 4, 5 years. But those effects which don't really directly kill you, but in the long term kills all the population because you die, let's say, in the long term. So you lose orientation, for example. And the impact, of course, varies with the compound toxicity, the exposure level, the location, and pollinator species. It's very general, but it's always important to really have all these disclaimers when discussing the issues. Not all species react in the same way, which also leads to the next point, the risk assessment part. So risk can increase by labeling is insufficient or not respected. It's often the case. Application equipment is faulty or not fit for purpose, and risk assessment and regulations are insufficient. So even in countries like Germany, we have a quite high standard of risk assessment, but still we only look at 1 or 2, let's say, beneficial species when we test the effects of pesticides. And many of them are quite, let's say, robust. So it's not really representative of the larger set of species out there. So that's a point where we also discuss nationally how to improve risk assessment approaches in order to get better assessments for the application. In this case, of pesticide, but also for other things like GMOs. The responses are clear. You have to raise the standards of risk assessment, reduce the usage. Everybody talks about IPM, but this was already a term which was used maybe 30, 40 years ago. Not much has really changed. Training extension is quite important in farmers. And of course, using modern technology to reduce spray drift, for example, dust emissions. There are lots of opportunities there which you can make use of. So it's not only about reducing, but also about better management of your, let's say, equipment, better maintenance. We know from data in Europe, for example in France, if you reduce insecticides used by around 70%, you have nearly the same yield of most agricultural products. There was a large study done in France with 700 or 400 farmers, comparing different yields with different applications of pesticides, or insecticides, herbicides, and fungicides. And those having 70% less than the others in terms of application have the same yield. It's quite interesting, this answer. There is truly much more options for reducing at least insecticides. For herbicides and fungicides, it's often more difficult. This is the 4-point summary of the entire assessment, what we presented there. So declines in both wild and managed pollinators are clear. They provide us with a wide range of values and benefits, I've shown before. It face multiple interacting threats, and there's a wide range of options to mitigate these effects, and also to include things like scientific and indigenous and local knowledge. The whole presentation was much longer. I presented this one 2.5 years ago in this place. So from this pollination assessment, there were quite a number of impacts after it was agreed. So you had the international level, you had the Wild Bee Day, is May 20, if you don't know. May 20 is the Wild Bee Day, which is the World Bee Day. You also have May 22 is Day of Biodiversity, so it's quite close to each other. May 23 is my birthday. Want to send us a postcard, or maybe some email or whatever it is nowadays. It was decided in COP14. It was adopted, the whole plan for action, which resulted from our assessment, and led to the International Institute for the Conservation and Sustainable Use of Pollinators from FAO. There are trialogues and coordination going on in UNDP. At national levels, we have an expanding list of national strategies and action plans on pollination, sub-Saharan Argentina, Canada, Colombia, India, France, Netherlands, Norway, Brazil, Korea, USA, and some others, I guess, in the meantime. We have the so-called Coalition of the Willing to protect pollinators and to promote pollination, which has a number of 15 or 16 countries now being active there, many European, but also many southern countries. So different things going on which, let's say, build on this assessment's outcome. We also do things on national languages. It's a German thing. It's a German summary of the whole thing because the Germans don't speak English. And German is not a UN language. They also translate all the things, which makes you think about finding the right ways, translating it into your local language, because some terms are useful, others are not. So we met with extension people and with farmers, had a meeting of 50, 60 people discussing all the recommendations in our national language to phrase it in such a way that's really relevant and understandable. And I think it's the same thing we have to do across the globe, very different regional or national languages. You have the advantage that you speak all English, but it's not the case in my home country, for example. You have a high education level, but English is still kind of space for improvement, put it like this. The other reports, so there was just to pollinate one example. The 5 ones released just in March 2018 in Colombia, where there was the last plenary. There was one for Africa, one for Europe and Central Asia, Americas, Asia Pacific, and the land regulation one. In total, in these 5 reports, there were 550 expert authors involved, 18,000 publications have been cited, and 20,000 comments have been dealt with for all these ones. I said before, in the pollination alone, we had also 20,000 comments. So it's quite interesting to see the more specific assessments create more comments oftentimes than the larger, the more global ones. Maybe because it's easier to make a specific comment on a particular specific topic rather than on the global view. This was Medellin, just so impressions. There was the agreement of the Europe Central Asia. These are the 2 co-chairs congratulating each other after it was done. There's always a process where you, in the end, you're very happy. You see everybody's happy. And this Bob Watson last hammer okay thing is approved. So that's, everybody's happy afterwards. It's a long process, and it takes a lot of patience than before, and all these meetings are very, well, it's really a challenge to survive them physically and mentally. So if you discuss the whole night through, it's really something which is not every day's practice. No, it's really, really hard. But if you discuss long in the night, you also find conclusions or compromises. Maybe partly only because physically you can't do it anymore, so you have to find a solution, which makes it more pragmatic in the end. Which also might be, let's say, create some errors here and there, but in principle it leads to this kind of joint, let's say, agreement on these documents. So currently we have in IPBES task force, 3 task forces and 5 expert groups working. Task force on capacity building, one on data and knowledge, and one on higher education, indigenous and local knowledge. And 5 expert groups, the one which I'm coordinating with economics is the global assessment, just mentioned before. Then starting assessment of values and sustainable use of wild species. Parallel to this assessment, expert groups, we have those working on scenarios and models, which is not an assessment, just ongoing update on knowledge, and policy support tools and methodology. So these are the, let's say, total 8 ongoing activities within the IPBES process. 3 of them are assessments. The next plenary, that's one in April and May in Paris, has 2 major topics. So that's hopefully improving our assessment, and of course working on the IPBES work program up to 2030, the second work program. These are the 2 major items for the meeting, which takes 1 week with 130 country delegations. Okay, all right, I'll give you some impressions on the work we've done so far on the global assessment. It's all, of course, it's all top secret. That's why it's put there on Facebook. If it says something is top secret, it spreads much more easily than if it says just a normal thing. So it's top secret, it's an ideal condition for spreading the news. Top secret. Don't tell, yeah, okay, everybody tells it. But these are things, these are not critical ones, it's just a kind of overview. So we assess the state of knowledge on past, present, and possible future trends in multi-scale interactions between people and nature. That's one of the things, taking into consideration different worldviews and knowledge systems. I mentioned this before in the conceptual framework already, these different knowledge systems are quite important. The areas include land, inland waters, coastal zones, and oceans, which is the global coverage, of course. The time frame is status and trends back as far as 50 years ago, up to 2020, up to now, and plausible future projections on possible pathways between now and 2050. These are general frames. It's we work on 6 chapters, actually, and there are, let's say, 2 groups or 3 groups of chapters. The introduction, of course, is kind of setting the scene. There are status and trends. First of all, look at the status in nature and services. Then we focus on international goals, which are mainly the Aichi targets and the sustainable development goals. So, how far have they gone so far, according to the aims we have, in relation mainly to biodiversity and services? Aichi is, of course, biodiversity-related targeting, and SDGs is a sustainable development in general, but many of them have to do with biodiversity and services. So one chapter, chapter 3, works on this only. Look at the future. We have here the kind of broad coverage. What are the plausible future developments? And this one is more on international goals. So how can we reach our goals? Under which scenarios can we reach certain SDGs or combination of certain SDGs? That's this kind of, so this is more goal-oriented. And chapter 6 is tailored messages for groups of decision makers, try to extract what are the most relevant informations which are needed in policy making on a global scale. This is the team. There was the last meeting we had last August in Frankfurt, in this case in Germany. We had 150 experts from 51 countries, natural scientists, about half of them, the other ones social and interdisciplinary ones. This is a quite good balance already. Could even be more in the social sciences, but we are quite proud to have nearly half of the people from social sciences related ones. 252 contributing authors, so besides the ones writing the text, the main text, the lead authors, there are people invited to supply certain text elements, which then are used or not used, depends on the authors, on the main authors, to finalize the entire assessment. So if the contributing author is not a real author in terms of authorship, but also has no responsibility in terms of what is written out of this material. But in many contexts you need additional information from other colleagues. So actually we have now 400 people providing text on our entire global assessment, coming from more than 50 countries, the other countries as well here. Okay, these are the different supporting units. This is the team, so that's Eduardo Bondicio, he's from Brazil, an anthropologist, a very nice friend in the meantime. We have Sandra Diaz from Argentina, and myself, so we are the three co-chairs. This is TSU, which is heavily supporting us. There's a team of 5 people running, or let's say managing, or entertaining these 150 plus other people. It's an interesting job. It's a lot to do with psychology, a lot to do with kind of integrating, not talking to people, listening, this kind of thing. It's mainly about people, and if the atmosphere is right, the content comes automatically. If the atmosphere is not right, forget about all the scientific content, it doesn't work. It has to be the people who really interact and find a kind of common level of interaction, common respect, all these kind of things which are important. The process of doing the assessment, just to show you what. So we started in 2016, it was the first author meeting here in 2016, the second one was in end of 17, and the third one was here end of last year. So we started with the chapter outlines, the scoping, look at the IRK, the knowledge phase, scoping report starting, author selection. So actually author selection is the first important step. So first the co-chairs are identified, and it's very hard to explain. So for example, how was I identified? We had the defense of our coordination assessment in Kuala Lumpur, and this went quite nicely, and then later I got a comment, because I'm smoking sometimes, and I was sitting out there having a cigarette, and Prof Watson came, please stop smoking, we might still need you. That was the first indication of something that might consider me as a co-chair of the global assessment. So this kind of developments that try to select, let's say, 3 people covering the global aspects, different disciplines. And as soon as they approach you, then they ask you whether you'll be willing. It takes some months to really agree on this, because it's not an easy decision. It takes a lot of your time. So for me, it was 80% of my time the last 1.5 years was only for this, so it was very hard. That means, before I said yes, so they asked me, before I said yes, I talked to my government, so if you are German government, want to have a German co-chair, are you willing to support me? So we negotiated, I gave me 1.5 postdocs for 3 years to support my work, but that was kind of a good thing actually, and also the travel budget wasn't there. Most people here, especially in Rio countries, use their own budget for the whole work, and there is no refunding of the time you invest. So most traveling things are covered, but that's it, all the rest is voluntary. So you have to know that all this work is voluntary work. So in this case, our government agreed to support me, and I said yes to them, and it was sometime in May 2016. On a Tuesday. Okay, so thank you for accepting. Do you have time the next weekend? So 4 days later, I went to Bonn for a meeting with 450 CVs in front of us, selecting the first set of offers with 13, 14, 15 people, different criteria. So you weekend just going through CVs and find the first orientation. This is a process that takes very long. So first select is so-called CLAs, and then later you have the additional LAs to support all the chapters. Then you have to get the agreement, the willingness. If you decline, you have to find new ones. And it's very hard to have the balance. So if you, let's say you have somebody from the female Philippine ILK marine scientist combination. Well, if this person drops out, it's very hard to replace because it's only once in a lifetime you find somebody like this. So that's kind of the art of selecting people in this process. Okay, so just to show you, we had different meetings on chapters, most in Germany, some in France, and it's all in Europe, because we could secure funding from the European countries for all the experts to travel to these places. Oftentimes we get funding on national level. The donor requires you to have the meeting in your country, which is okay because they just finance the travel budget anyhow. Then you have these different, let's say, cross-chapter meetings, local knowledge one on Baños, two in Hungary, one indicator South Korea, other was Argentina and Norway. So it's just some subset of meetings we have. All the time we did systematic literature review, which is a topic on its own, how to systematically assess literature, because there's a huge number of papers out there, how to find the ones that are really relevant. Many of them are, of course, review papers. Then we have the online call for contribution of ILK, this is local knowledge, because oftentimes it's not available. And these are all the meetings here on this ILK context, so different ones in different places across the globe, different ethnic groups, trying to, let's say, integrate all this, let's say, knowledge which is out there in a non-scientific manner. So Eduardo Montice, one of the coaches, was very heavily into this, and I think this was the first assessment now. We really had a kind of big portion of ILK components. Okay, and this is some of the cross-chapter meetings. So we meet every once in a while, different places across the globe, different activities, just some impressions here. The ILK issues, the global assessment is the first assessment to systematically examine and incorporate indigenous and local knowledge and issues concerning indigenous peoples and local communities at a global scale. And it's quite important because local indigenous people manage or have tenure rights over at least 25% of the land surface, so they're really in charge of quite a large number of areas which are relevant for us. And also 40% of protected areas or intact nature is under the custody of local communities. Here's all the meetings we had there, different places. There was one in the Arctic, for example, this one here, with the Inuit and some other people working and living in the Arctic areas. Very different approach from people from the Amazon area, for example. So, the work we're doing, skip some of the slides now. Chapter 1. So these are all the chapters we have in the assessment. We gave the introduction in chapter 1. And on the chapters 2, there are 3 chapters 2. Some trends, nature trends, drivers, nature and NCPs, nature contribution to people. They all feed into the other chapters, of course, ideally. No details here, but if you'd like to have the slides, I can provide them. And it will all be published anyhow in May, hopefully, when the whole thing comes out. Then the drivers chapter looks into all the drivers, direct, indirect ones, into the targets, especially the SDGs and the Aichi ones, and they feed into the other chapters. This is like the whole thing to work at, actually. Also the futures going to, let's say, the intended futures and also the policy making components, and this one's heavily interact. So which are the pathways for the future? What does it mean for policy making? That's in a nutshell, but that's the entire process we are following. Our heads followed so far was practically finished. So at the moment we had finished chapter revisions, responses to review comments are mostly done. Received around 3,500 comments only on some of the policymakers, so I'm in charge of these ones. I'm working on this right now, 3,500 lines in an Excel spreadsheet. For each you have to use a single, polite, adequate comment of what you did with this comment. That's really something, it's a nightmare in terms of time. But of course, you will limit yourself to 50 a day. So I have 50 a day, 3,500, how many days does it take? So you have to do more than 50 a day, otherwise you can't manage until the deadline. That's as simple as this. The cross-chapter alignments we finished. The summary is now, the summary policymakers is out for the governments again. They give the last comments, which we use as inputs for the plenary in Paris, then from April 29 to May the 4th, actually. That's wrong, that should be May, sorry. Okay, that was the main part of the thing, and I guess time is more or less over. Maybe you can 5 minutes. We have an add-on, which I don't show, just summarize. Of course, many scientists put their work into this, let's say, assessments, and they always can ask, what's the reward for this for a scientist? And there's some other slides which I can just, let's say, send you if you're interested, on how we use assessment results for making review papers, which then are again highly cited. So many options how you can make use of this, let's say, inventory of knowledge in a scientific context to really also improve your record of publications. And it's something you really have to do, because after 2 or 3 years doing just this and only making the assessment, you might be out of science if you don't really do this. So, but it's really rewarding. We have many examples of papers which you can also publish in high-ranking journals. So the Summary Policymaker on Pollination had a summary of it as a review in Nature, 10 pages paper in Nature, which is not every day you get 10 pages in Nature. So that's really something which we really can make use of. So it's not only the voluntary work, it also is a reward if you do it right, which really helps you to also improve the scientific standing. Okay, so I have this 5 minutes IPBES film about the regional assessments in general with a certain focus on Asia. These films are all, can all be downloaded also from the internet on the IPBES homepage, but it takes a while. It's 0.5 gigabytes, and I downloaded it back home already, so when I came, it's almost on my computer. So just try to show it now and hope it works.
The rich and diverse variety of life on Earth, in all its forms, is the foundation of our well-being, providing food, clean water, air, and much of our energy. Biodiversity and nature's contributions to people are at the heart of not only our survival, however, but also of our cultures, identities, and enjoyment of life. Despite its critical importance, biodiversity continues to decline in every region of the world, endangering economies, livelihoods, food, water and energy security, and the quality of life of people everywhere. The Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES, recently published 4 landmark regional assessment reports, one each for the Americas, Africa, Europe and Central Asia, and Asia and the Pacific. The result of 3 years of work by more than 550 leading experts from over 100 countries, the 4 IPBES reports are the most important expert contribution of the past decade to the state of knowledge about biodiversity and nature's contributions to people. The reports focus on answers to key questions about the importance of biodiversity, progress being made to conserve it, and the threats and opportunities for a sustainable future. With the best available information communicated effectively, people all over the world can make better decisions and take more effective action to meet global commitments such as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the Aichi biodiversity targets, and the Paris Agreement on climate change. Biodiversity and ecosystems support more than 4.5 billion people in Asia and the Pacific. But rapid urbanization, deforestation, invasive alien species, climate change, socio-economic transformations, and loss of traditional knowledge and practices have led to a decline in biodiversity and nature's contributions to people across the region. About 90% of global aquaculture production occurs in Asia and the Pacific. However, an estimated 37% of aquatic and semi-aquatic species are now threatened. Rising land, air, and ocean pollution has also greatly impacted the health of both nature and people. Of the 10 rivers in the world with the highest amounts of plastic waste, 8 are located in Asia, which also accounts for up to 95% of all plastic pollution in the ocean. The Asia-Pacific region has achieved significant economic growth and reduced poverty, while simultaneously increasing the coverage of protected areas and forests. But more needs to be done. The IPBES report highlights the need to increase regionally coordinated protected area management efforts and to improve the application of science and technology, cross-border collaboration, culturally sensitive scenario planning, and the capacity building and empowerment of indigenous and local communities in governance and management of nature. The message from all 4 IPBES regional assessment reports is that, with the exception of some positive examples, biodiversity and nature's capacity to contribute to people are being degraded, reduced, and lost due to a number of common pressures, including habitat stress, the overexploitation and unsustainable use of natural resources, air, land, and water pollution, increasing numbers and impacts of invasive alien species, as well as climate change, among others.
The best available evidence, gathered by the world's leading experts, points us now to a single conclusion. We must act to halt and reverse the unsustainable use of nature, or risk not only the future we want, but even the lives we currently lead. Fortunately, the evidence also shows that we know how to protect and partially restore our vital natural assets.
IPBES, Science and Policy for People and Nature.